My parents named me out on their bad luck. When I walked away, I carried every bit of luck with me. Can you imagine spending your entire life being told you were the reason everything went wrong? That you were a walking, breathing curse? And then, after years of silence, the people who said those things call you up, not to apologize, but to demand a massive sum of money. What would you do? That's my story. For as long as I can remember, I was the family scapegoat. My older brother was perfect. Good grades, star athletes made our parents proud. Then, 3 years after him, I came along. And according to them, that's when their luck ran out. My dad lost his job 6 months after I was born. My mom had a car accident when I was 2. My grandma died when I was 4. Even the family dog running away at 5? Yep, all my fault. Every single bad thing that happened got pinned on me, like I had some kind of dark cloud hovering over my head. My mom used to call me her little storm cloud at first, a laugh in her voice. But that joke died quickly. By the time I was 10, the blaming was open, raw, and constant. Higher electric bill? Must be me. Something broke? My bad energy made it happen. Dad didn't get a promotion? Too burdened by his unlucky child. My brother, of course, picked up on it. He started calling me Jinx. And that name stuck through all of middle school, all of high school. It became my identity. And I believed them. For so long, I truly believed I was cursed. I apologized constantly, even for things that weren't remotely my fault. I tried to make myself small, invisible, hoping my bad luck wouldn't spread. I worked my butt off in school, clinging to good grades, desperate to prove I wasn't a burden. At 16, I got a job, started paying for my own clothes, my school supplies, anything to lessen the financial drain they claimed I was. Nothing worked. Nothing changed how they saw me. When I was 17, my brother got into a great college. My parents threw him this huge celebratory party. They bragged to all their friends about how successful he was going to be. A year later, I got into the same college with an even better scholarship. You know what my mom said? It probably won't last. Things always fall apart for you. My dad suggested I go to community college instead, save them the embarrassment when I inevitably failed. But I went anyway. I packed 2 suitcases, emptied a small bank account I'd been secretly filling for years, and left home the day I turned 18. My parents didn't help me move. My brother didn't even say goodbye. My mom's parting words? Call when you need to come home. You will. I never called. College was hard, but not because of some curse. It was hard because I had to unlearn everything they'd ever told me about myself. I made real friends for the first time, people who didn't treat me like a plague. I joined clubs, studied things I actually loved. I failed a test once, and my roommate just said, "It's okay, we'll study harder next time." No blame, just support. I graduated with honors. Got a job at an architecture firm, 4 hours away. Worked my way up to project manager in 5 years. Bought my own small condo. Adopted a cat who, thankfully, didn't run away. Started dating someone amazing, Celian, who actually liked being around me. Everything my parents predicted would fall apart, it stayed together, because I built it myself, without their voices in my head. Meanwhile, back home, things were getting worse. My dad's drinking finally caught up with him. He lost another job. My mom's health declined because she refused doctors until it became an emergency. And my brother, the golden child, he dropped out of college after 2 years and moved back home. Couldn't hold down a job, spent his days playing video games in his childhood bedroom. Fool's gold indeed, but they never connected the dots. They just kept waiting for me to fail. My mom would call once a year on my birthday, her voice laced with that fake concern, asking how I was holding up, as if she expected me to be in tatters. When I told her about my promotion, she'd say, "Don't get too comfortable. Good things don't last for people like you." When I mentioned buying my condo, she asked about my debt. When I said I was happy, she just laughed and said, "Give it time." I stopped telling her things. Eventually, I stopped calling back. Then, 3 years ago, my brother needed surgery. My parents couldn't afford it. My dad called me for the first time in years. He didn't ask how I was. He just said they needed money. And since I apparently had so much now, I should share it with the family who raised me. I stared at my phone for 20 minutes after hanging up. My hands were shaking. $15,000. The number just echoed in my head like a broken record. 3 years of silence, and this is what broke it. Not an apology, not even a hello. Just a dollar amount and the expectation I'd pay it. My chest felt so tight, a crushing feeling I hadn't experienced since I left home. That same old feeling of being blamed for existing. I gently put the phone down, watching it as if it might ring again with something even worse. The living room grew darker as the sun set. I didn't bother turning on lights. My cat jumped onto the couch, purring, and I automatically scratched behind her ears, trying to focus on her soft fur instead of the anger burning in my throat. Celian came home around 6:30. He dropped his bag, and I watched his face change as he took in the dark room my expression. When I told him about the call, the words came out flat, mechanical, like I was reading a grocery list instead of explaining how my father had just demanded money after years of treating me like a curse. Celian sat beside me, his jaw tight. He asked what my dad said exactly, and I repeated it word for word. It was already burned into my memory. His face shifted from concern to something harder, protective, and somehow that made me feel less crazy for being so upset. He asked if I was okay. I paused. I didn't know the answer. Part of me wanted to scream. Part of me felt guilty for even being angry. Another part just felt incredibly sad and tired. "I'm not sure," I finally said. He just nodded, like it made perfect sense. We sat in silence for a few minutes. I tried to sort through the mess in my head. The anger made sense. But the guilt? That nagging voice, maybe I should help. He's family. Refusing makes you just as bad as them. And under it all, the profound sadness. This heavy realization that our relationship had become purely transactional. They only reached out when they needed something. I grabbed my phone, pulled up my therapist's contact. My hands shook a little as I dialed. It went to voicemail. It was after hours. I left a message, asking for an emergency slot. I could feel old patterns, old voices, trying to crawl back into my brain. "You're selfish. Family helps family. Good daughters don't abandon their brothers." It sounded exactly like my mother. I hated that voice. I hated that it still had power over me. I hung up, told Celian I'd called Melina. He squeezed my hand. "Good idea," he said. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. Celian slept next to me, but my brain wouldn't shut off. Memories cycled, ones I thought I'd dealt with. Me at 6, Dad losing another job. Mom saying it was my fault, he was stressed. The car accident at 2, Mom spinning the story for years about being distracted by me in the back seat. My grandmother dying, my parents looking at me when they talked about bad luck following our family. Each memory a small, unhealed cut. I realized I was crying, silently. Melina's office called back the next morning. She had a cancellation. I called in sick to work, something I never do. I spent the morning pacing my condo, cleaned the kitchen that was already spotless, organized my bookshelf by color, then author, then color again. Started 3 different streaming shows, couldn't focus. When it was finally time, I drove to her office, 15 minutes early, rehearsing in the car. Walking in, I felt like I'd time-traveled. I was the anxious 23-year-old again, not the 28-year-old who thought she had it all together. Melina gestured to the familiar chair. Tears were already building. "What happened?" she asked. The words poured out. 15 minutes straight. About my father's voice after 3 years. The money demand. All of it. She just listened, nodding occasionally, letting me get it all out. When I finally stopped, she waited a moment, then asked, "What do you actually want to do?" Not what I should do. Not what would make me a good person. what I genuinely wanted. I admitted I'd already looked up Curtis's condition. The surgery was real, necessary. But I also knew my parents had let him live at home rent-free for years, playing video games while they paid for everything. They never made him get a job with insurance. Never pushed him to be independent, the way they'd pushed me out the door at 18. I paid for my own clothes at 16. He was 31, and they still did his laundry. Melina asked why Curtis didn't have insurance. The question made me stop. It was because he'd never held a job long enough to qualify. 6 months total in 5 years. Always quitting or getting fired. Always moving back home where my parents enabled him. They let him stay dependent while they blamed me for being a burden when I was literally a child. The double standard hit me hard. I paid my own way as a teenager, and he's in his 30s fully supported. Yet, I'm the one who gets the call demanding money. We spent the next 30 minutes talking about the difference between helping family in a crisis and rewarding the same broken patterns that made me leave in the first place. Melina pointed out that giving them money without conditions would just confirm their belief that I existed to solve their problems, that I was responsible for fixing everything. What message does that send? She asked. If you hand over $15,000 after they spent years telling you you were the source of all their bad luck. I hadn't thought about it that way, but she was right. It would be like agreeing with them, accepting that I owed them something for the burden of raising their cursed daughter. I left therapy with homework. Write down exactly what I was willing to offer and what my boundaries were before I responded to my father. The idea of setting terms instead of just saying yes or no felt strange, scary, and maybe a little powerful. Melina reminded me, you get to decide what kind of relationship you have with them. You don't have to accept the role they assigned you. I drove home, thinking about what reasonable help might look like. Something that didn't make me feel like I was betraying myself, but also didn't completely abandon Curtis when he was sick. That night, Celian found me at the kitchen table, laptop open, notebook covered in scribbles. He kissed the top of my head, asked what I wanted for dinner. I don't really care, I admitted. We ordered Thai. While we waited, he sat across from me. How are you doing with everything? I closed my laptop. I've been going in circles all day. He reached across the table, took my hand. There might not be a clear right answer, he said, but you can still set boundaries. As we ate between bites of pad thai, I told him I kept thinking about Curtis genuinely needing the surgery. It feels wrong to just ignore that, I said. Celian nodded. Wanting to help doesn't make you responsible for fixing everything your parents messed up. Maybe, he suggested, you could help Curtis directly with finding resources, instead of just handing money to your parents who haven't managed their finances in decades. The idea clicked. I could research hospital payment plans, financial assistance programs, maybe even help Curtis apply for medical aid. That felt different from writing a check to my father and pretending it would solve anything long-term. Celian pointed out it would help Curtis get care without enabling my parents to avoid responsibility. We talked it through. I started feeling less trapped between two bad options. Saturday morning, I woke up determined. I had to draft that email before I lost my nerve. Celian went to the gym. I made coffee, sat at my laptop, a clear head for the first time since that call. I typed my father's email address, stared at the blank space. The first draft came out angry. Delete. The second, too apologetic, like I was asking permission to have boundaries. The third felt closer. I wrote that I understood Curtis needed surgery and I wanted to help him get the medical care he needed. Then, I explained I wasn't comfortable giving money directly to them, but I was willing to help Curtis research financial assistance and payment plan options. I spent an hour rewording, taking out anything defensive or self-justifying. By lunch, I had something clear and firm without being mean. I saved it as a draft. Wanted fresh eyes. Sunday, I read it twice, made a few small changes. Celian read it over my shoulder. Sounds reasonable and compassionate, he said, and still protects your boundaries. I moved my cursor to send and hesitated. Part of me knew this would make them angry. They wanted money, no strings attached. I was offering something different. But I also knew if I just gave them what they wanted, I'd resent myself. And nothing would truly change. I took a deep breath, clicked send, before I could second-guess myself again. Monday afternoon, my phone rang. My mother's name. My stomach dropped. I shouldn't answer, but some old instinct made me. Before I could even say hello, she launched into it. How could I be so ungrateful? After everything they did raising me. Her voice had that sharp edge that used to make me want to disappear. We sacrificed so much, she seethed, and this is how you repay us. I tried to interrupt, to explain my offer. She talked right over me. We don't need your charity, she spat. We need family loyalty. Loyalty. From her mouth. It almost made me laugh, but it also made my chest ache. I had spent my whole childhood being loyal to people who blamed me for existing. I managed to get a few words in about helping Curtis find assistance. She cut me off again. That's not real help. Real help would be writing a check and trusting us to handle it. I could hear my father saying something in the background, muffled. My mother switched tactics. She started listing all my failures. A, B in math in 6th grade. Not getting cast in an 8th grade play. Twisting every normal childhood moment into proof I was defective. I felt myself shrinking. My responses grew shorter. It was like I was 14 again, sitting at the kitchen table, while she explained how the broken dishwasher was linked to my bad energy. I hated that I was falling into this pattern. I couldn't stop shrinking. Then she said something that made my whole body go still. You probably have plenty of money to spare, since you don't have kids draining your resources, like Curtis drained ours. The casual way she blamed a child for being born, for needing things. Something broke loose in my chest. I actually laughed out loud. It surprised both of us. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was the sound of something finally snapping after being bent too far for too long. What's so funny? She asked, her voice ice cold. That's exactly the problem, I said, my voice shaking but steady. You're still blaming other people for your own choices, and I'm done being part of that. I kept talking. I spent my whole life being blamed for things I couldn't control. I'm not doing it anymore. She tried to interrupt, but this time I didn't let her. I talked over her. I reiterated I'd help Curtis directly with resources, but I wouldn't hand over money to enable them to keep refusing responsibility. I heard my father yelling something about disrespectful children and ungrateful daughters. My mother's voice shifted from angry to terrifyingly cold. Fine, she said, we'll figure it out ourselves. Like we always have to. No thanks to you. She hung up before I could say anything else. I stood there, phone in hand, shaking. I walked to the bathroom, locked myself in a stall, trying to get my breathing under control. My whole body vibrated with adrenaline, anger, and something that might have been pride. I actually stood up to her. I said things I'd thought for years, but never dared to voice. When I finally emerged, I splashed cold water on my face and went back to my desk. Work was impossible that afternoon. Celian found me that evening, staring at nothing. He sat down and I immediately started crying. Angry, frustrated tears I'd held in since the call. He pulled me against his chest, just held me. When I could finally speak, I told him everything. How she'd brought up every childhood failure. How the comment about kids draining resources had broken something. Hearing her blame Curtis for existing the same way she'd blamed me. Celian ran his hand through my hair. Setting boundaries doesn't make you a bad person, he reminded me. They called asking for help. The second you offered help with conditions, they rejected it. They wanted you to fix their problem without them having to change anything. I knew he was right, but it still hurt. Some part of me had kept hoping they might surprise me, actually hear what I was saying. Instead, they proved they were exactly who I'd always known them to be. The next day, I drafted an email to Curtis. found his old address, stared at the blank message for 20 minutes, deleted 3 versions, settled on something short, practical. I wrote that I wanted to help him directly with researching hospital payment plans and financial assistance, listed a few resources I'd found, offered to help him apply. No mention of our parents. No drama. Just the problem. My finger hovered over send for another 5 minutes. Click. The email disappeared. I immediately wondered if the address even worked anymore. I checked my email obsessively for the next 3 days. Every notification made my stomach jump. I kept my phone next to me. Woke up in the middle of the night. Celian noticed me checking at dinner. I told him about the email. He just squeezed my hand. On the 3rd day, a response. Curtis. Just a few sentences, thanking me for offering, but saying, our parents already found another solution. No explanation. I read it 5 times, looking for hidden meaning. Nothing. Just straightforward. I felt a weird mix of relief. I didn't have to get more involved, and guilt. Maybe I should have just given them the money. I hated that I was still second-guessing myself about people who had never second-guessed treating me badly. My next therapy appointment with Melina was 2 days later. I brought up the call immediately. She listened, then asked me to notice how I responded during different parts of the conversation. I realized I'd gotten quieter and quieter as my mother spoke. I fell right back into that pattern of accepting what she said, getting smaller. I apologized for things that weren't my fault, just like I did at 10 years old. But Melina pointed out that I also broke the pattern by speaking up at the end. The fact that you regressed initially, she said, doesn't erase the fact that you found your voice and set a boundary. I told her it didn't feel like enough. I still let her talk to me that way for most of the call. Melina reminded me, changing patterns takes time. Don't expect yourself to be perfect immediately. She asked what I learned. I learned my mother will never see me differently, no matter what I accomplish. Melina nodded. That's actually important information, because now you can stop trying to prove yourself to someone who refuses to see the proof. I spent the rest of the week checking my phone constantly, even though Curtis had already responded. I kept expecting my parents to call back with more demands, more anger. Nothing. The silence felt almost worse than another fight. It confirmed what I already suspected. They were interested in my money, not in having any kind of relationship with me. If they actually cared, they would have followed up. Instead, they got told no and just disappeared. I told Melina this in our next session. How does that make you feel? She asked. Sad, said, but also kind of free, because now I don't have to wonder anymore if they might change. Work became my escape. I threw myself into a new project, designing a community center. Hours at my desk, early mornings, late nights. My boss, Yoim, stopped by my office one Friday, noticed my extra hours. Everything okay? He asked. He suggested I take a day off. I realized I was using work to avoid dealing with my feelings. I thanked him, promised to take Monday off, even though the idea of a whole day with nothing to distract me sounded awful. My friend Alyssa caught me in the break room later. We went for lunch, barely touched our salads. I told her everything, about being the family scapegoat, Curtis's surgery, my dad's demand, the call with my mom, standing up to her and still feeling guilty. Alyssa listened, silent. When I finished, she told me she'd been no contact with her father for 6 years. The guilt never completely goes away, she said, but it does get easier. Cutting him off was the healthiest thing I ever did for myself. Hearing someone I respected professionally talk about similar family problems made me feel less alone. Alyssa said something that really stuck with me. Choosing yourself isn't selfish when the alternative is setting yourself on fire to keep others warm. It's a common saying, but hearing it from her, this successful, respected woman who clearly had her life together and who made the same choice I was making, it made me feel like maybe I wasn't broken or wrong for protecting myself. Maybe taking care of myself wasn't the same thing as being a bad daughter. Maybe my parents made it impossible to do both. That night, I dug out an old journal from college, one my therapist back then had me keep. I hadn't written in it for years, but something made me start again. I wrote out the whole pattern of blame, from my birth until now, specific incidents, how it all connected into this system where nothing was ever my parents' fault. Job loss, money problems, family issues, always me or later Curtis. I wrote about how they never took responsibility for their drinking, their health, their poor financial choices. Seeing it all laid out on paper helped me understand it as a pattern, not just random bad moments. It wasn't about me being unlucky or cursed. It was about them needing someone to blame, so they didn't have to look at themselves. Celian suggested a weekend trip. He found a tiny cottage on the coast. We drove out Friday after work, and I felt the tension ease from my shoulders the further we got from the city. The cottage was small, old, but right on the beach. Saturday morning, I walked the sand by myself while Celian slept in. The ocean was cold gray. The wind whipped my hair. I kept walking. I thought about how the physical distance from my hometown mirrored the emotional distance I was trying to keep. For hours wasn't enough. Sometimes I needed to be here where they couldn't reach me, where I could hear myself think. Walking on that beach, I had a moment of clarity, obvious yet new. My parents' whole narrative about me being bad luck? It was never actually about me. I was 6 months old when my dad lost his job. 2, when my mom had her accident. I didn't cause those things, but it was easier for them to blame a baby than admit dad got fired for performance issues or mom was driving distracted. Every bad thing after that just got added to the story because they needed the story to be true. If I was the problem, then they didn't have to change. They could keep making poor financial decisions, refusing to deal with their health, and blame it all on their unlucky daughter. The realization didn't make it hurt less, but it made sense. It was never about me. It was always about them. Back home, I dug through my contacts for Heist's number. We hadn't talked in months. Life got busy. She answered on the 3rd ring, sounding surprised and happy. We spent 10 minutes catching up. Her new job, my promotion, her cat. Then I told her. The whole situation. My parents calling, Curtis, the money, everything. Hai listened without interrupting. When I finished, she reminded me of freshman year, when I'd apologized to our dorm neighbor for breathing too loud. You used to apologize for existing, she said. And now you're setting boundaries with people who spent 18 years making you feel worthless. She told me she was proud of how far I'd come. I hadn't realized how much I needed to hear that. We talked for another hour about everything and nothing. It felt good to just exist with someone who knew me when I was still learning how to be a person. Near the end, Hai mentioned her engagement, a spring wedding. Will you be in the wedding party? She asked. Yes. I said immediately. Pure joy. This was my life now. These were the people who chose me, and I chose them back. After we hung up, I sat on my couch, feeling lighter than I had in weeks. The next day, cleaning my closet, I found a cardboard box tucked away. Old family photos. My mom had given them to me when I moved out. I'd never looked at them. They made me feel weird. I pulled them out, spread them across my bed. Me at 5, at a birthday party, sad expression, everyone else smiling. Me at 8 in a school photo, shoulders hunched, trying to disappear. Me at 12, next to Curtis, grinning while I stared the ground. In every photo I could see it now. The sadness in my eyes, even in supposedly happy moments. I was carrying their blame before I even understood what it meant. I sorted through the box, kept only 3 photos, ones where I was alone, or with high school friends who actually liked me. The rest went into a donation bag. I didn't need physical reminders of a childhood I'd spent years trying to unlearn. At my next session, Melina asked what I wanted my relationship with my family to look like going forward. The question caught me off guard. I'd been so focused on what I didn't want. I sat there for a full minute. Finally, I told her I didn't want no contact forever. That felt like letting them win in a different way. But I couldn't go back to accepting their version of reality, where everything wrong in their lives was my fault. Melina nodded. She suggested we practice potential interactions, so I could maintain boundaries without getting defensive or trying to change their minds. We role-played. She played my mother, accusing me of abandoning the family. I practiced responding calmly. It was hard. Every time Melina threw an accusation at me in my mother's voice, I felt myself shrinking, getting smaller, like I was 15 again. We ran through it 5 times before I could get through it without shutting down or getting angry. Melina told me it was normal. Years of conditioning don't just disappear because I understand them now. That night, I wrote a letter. One I didn't plan to send. Everything I wished I could say to my parents. About the damage their scapegoating caused. About being 10 and believing I was cursed. Paying for my own school supplies at 16. Graduating college with honors, and still waiting for them to be proud. Building a whole life 4 hours away because I couldn't breathe in their house anymore. For pages long. When I finished, a pressure released from my chest. I saved it in a folder, closed my laptop. A month passed. No contact. I almost forgot about it. Then Curtis emailed. Brief update. Surgery went well. Recovering at home. 3 sentences, but at the end, this awkward line, thanking me for offering to help, even though they ended up not needing it. The closest thing to an apology I'd ever gotten from him. I read it 5 times, trying to see if I was reading too much into it. I waited a day to respond, just so I didn't seem too eager. I wrote back, glad he was okay. I'm here if he ever wants to talk. No pressure. Short, leaving the door open. Building some kind of relationship with Curtis, separate from our parents, felt possible. He was starting to see things differently. Maybe that was enough for now. At work the following week, Yoim called me into his office. I spent the whole walk there wondering what I'd done wrong. Instead, he told me I was being assigned to lead a major project, designing a new public library downtown. Biggest project of my career. I just stood there. Yoim said I'd earned it. 5 years of consistent, excellent work. He trusted me, and I actually let myself believe him. Didn't wait for the other shoe to drop. The project consumed my focus. In the best way, I used skills I developed over years of pushing myself to prove I wasn't cursed or unlucky or whatever my parents called me. Late nights, sketching ideas, meeting the design team, presenting to the client. Halfway through a presentation, I caught myself thinking my parents would say this success won't last. Something will fall apart. Then I consciously ignored that voice. Kept talking about load-bearing walls and natural light optimization. The client loved the design. Yoim walked me back to my desk. Mentioned the team wanted drinks Friday to celebrate. I'd be there, feeling this weird mix of pride and disbelief. Celian texted, asked how the presentation went. 3 celebration emojis. I didn't trust myself to put it into words. He responded immediately. Something special this weekend. 2 days later, he'd made reservations at that Italian place downtown. Invited Alyssa and a few people from my office. I spent 20 minutes staring at my closet, trying to figure out what to wear to a celebration dinner for my own success. Felt ridiculous, but also kind of nice. We met at the restaurant. I walked in, saw everyone already sitting waiting. Alyssa waved me over. Celian pulled out my chair. Yoim had ordered appetizers, talked about how impressed the client was. I sat there, listening to people I worked with every day say genuinely nice things about my work. And it hit me. This is what normal feels like. Nobody was waiting for me to fail. Nobody was joking about how long my luck would last. These people actually liked having me around. Thought I was good at what I did. Alyssa raised her glass. Said she knew I'd be running projects within a year of mentoring me. The whole table toasted. I had to blink back tears. I'd never had people celebrate me like this. My parents threw my brother a huge party for college, but told me not to make a big deal about my scholarship. This dinner with work friends meant more than any family gathering ever did. The next week, my phone reminded me it was my mother's birthday. I stared at the notification for a full minute, then swiped it away. Every single year since I left home, I'd called her, even when she barely acknowledged mine. This year, I didn't pick up the phone. I felt guilty for about an hour. That familiar knot in my stomach. You're being a bad daughter. Then I remembered. She hadn't called on my last birthday, breaking her yearly pattern of checking in to see if I'd failed yet. Couldn't even bother with the fake concern. The guilt faded pretty quick after that. I spent the rest of the day working on project plans. Didn't think about her again until Celian asked that evening if I'd talked to my family. No, I said. He just nodded, squeezed my hand, didn't push me to explain. My next session with Melina was 2 weeks later. She'd suggested spacing them out. You've been doing better, she said. I agreed. Melina leaned back in her chair. You're not just surviving anymore, she told me. You're actually doing well. Building a life based on what you value, instead of just reacting to your family's rejection. I sat with that. She was right. The condo, the job, Celian, Alyssa, my coworkers. None of it happened because I was running away. It happened because I chose it. I built it on purpose. Melina asked how that felt. Weird, I said. And good. And sometimes scary. Because there's this voice in my head that still expects it all to fall apart. She reminded me, that voice belongs to your mother, not to you. And you get to decide whether to listen to it. 3 weeks after that, a text from an unknown number. I almost deleted it, thinking spam. Something made me open it. It's Curtis, it said. Could we meet for coffee when I'm in your city next week for a follow-up appointment? A spike of anxiety. I thought I was past caring what he thought. I stared at the message. Part of me wanted to ignore it, but another part was curious. Why now? I texted back, sure. Coffee shop near the hospital. Somewhere public where I can leave if it gets weird. He responded with a thumbs-up emoji and a time. I spent the next week wondering if I'd made a mistake. Curtis looked healthier than I'd seen him in years. Gained weight. Not that gray, exhausted look. We ordered coffee, sat at a corner table. The first 10 minutes were so awkward, I almost regretted coming. He asked about work. Short answers. I asked about his recovery. Same. We were dancing around whatever he actually wanted to say. Then he put his cup down, looked at me directly for the first time. He said he'd been doing a lot of thinking during recovery about how our family worked, how things went down when we were kids. He was seeing things differently now that he'd had time away from the house. I didn't say anything, just waited. He mentioned how our parents freaked out when he needed surgery, couldn't handle the stress of actually taking care of someone. He watched them scramble, panic, blame everyone but themselves for not having money saved. It made him realize some things he hadn't wanted to see before. He didn't give me a full apology. I didn't expect one. What he did say was that he knew he benefited from being the golden child while I got blamed for everything. He admitted he went along with it because it was easier than questioning them. Watching our parents fall apart over his medical bills made him realize they weren't actually good at taking care of anyone. They just needed someone to blame. And I was convenient. I appreciated his honesty more than I expected. I didn't need him to completely reject our parents or validate every single thing I went through. Just hearing him acknowledge that the family dynamic was messed up and he played a role in it, that felt like enough. We talked for almost 2 hours, longer than I'd planned. College, dropping out, years playing video games because he didn't know what else to do. He asked about my life now. Actually listened when I told him about the firm, Celian, my condo. Before we left, we agreed to stay in touch. Maybe build something new instead of trying to fix a sibling relationship that never really existed. Curtis even mentioned he was finally looking for a real job, had interviews lined up. He said our parents were upset about him wanting to move out, telling him he wasn't ready. Sitting there, listening, I realized they needed someone to manage, to control. When I left, they still had Curtis. But now that he was getting healthier, wanting independence, they were losing their grip. Without me there to blame, Curtis became the target in different ways. Not a scapegoat, but a project. Someone they could hover over, make decisions for. He was starting to see it now, and he wanted out. After Curtis left, I sat in my car for a few minutes. Then I called Melina. Not our session day. She answered. I told her about the meeting. Everything Curtis said. I was surprised by how much lighter I felt. Having Curtis acknowledge even part of the family dysfunction made me feel less crazy about my decision to distance myself. Melina said it made sense. Sometimes having one person validate your experience can shift everything. She asked how I felt about staying in touch. Cautiously hopeful, I told her. I didn't expect him to become my best friend, but having one family member willing to be honest, that felt like something worth keeping. That night, Celian asked if I thought my parents would ever change. We were on the couch, my cat curled between us. He asked carefully. I thought about it for a long minute. I've stopped needing them to change, I said. Whether they grow or learn or stay exactly the same doesn't have to determine my peace anymore. I had built a life without them, and it was good. If they want to be part of it someday, they'll have to meet me where I am, not expect me to shrink back into the role they assigned me. Celian nodded, pulled me closer. We sat in comfortable silence. My cat stretched, claws digging into my leg. I didn't even mind. This moment right here, this quiet evening, my own home, someone who loved me, a pet who didn't run away. This was the life I chose, and it was enough. The holidays snuck up faster than I expected. November arrived, cold mornings, early darkness. Everyone at work talked Thanksgiving plans. Celian asked what I wanted to do. For the first time in my life, I didn't have to dread an obligatory phone call home or feel guilty for not showing up. I want to host something, I told him. Here, invite people who actually want to be around us. He grinned, started making a guest list. We spent a week planning the menu, cleaning the condo. I caught myself actually excited instead of anxious. Alyssa brought wine and homemade rolls. Celian's coworkers showed up with desserts. My cat hid under the bed for an hour, then slowly crept out to investigate. We crowded around my small dining table, passing dishes family style. It felt warm, real. Away holidays at my parents' house never did. Halfway through dinner, Alyssa refilled her wine glass. How are you doing with all this? She asked, gesturing at the table. I took a minute. She deserved honesty. I'm sad about what could have been, I admitted. The family I should have had. But I'm not willing to sacrifice my well-being anymore for people who refuse to see me clearly. She raised her glass. Healthiest thing I've heard all year. Everyone else raised theirs. We toasted to chosen family. New traditions. Something settled in my chest that had been unsettled for years. My phone buzzed during dessert. A text from Curtis. Just a few words. He was thinking of me. Hoped I was having a good day. Nothing elaborate. Brief. Genuine. I stared at the message. Then saved it to a new folder I'd started for the few good family moments I had. It wasn't much, but it was real. That mattered more than I expected. I texted back a simple, thanks, same to you. Put my phone away. Rejoined the conversation. Celian caught my eye across the table. I smiled at him, feeling hopeful. About at least one family connection that wasn't built on blame and dysfunction. Work picked up after Thanksgiving. Project, launch deadline. Long hours, finalizing details, coordinating contractors. It all came together better than I imagined. The community center opened in early December. The local architecture magazine sent someone to photograph it, interview me. 2 weeks later, the article came out. Yoim framed it, hung it in my office without asking. He just walked in one morning with a framed page, a drill, and put it on the wall. I stared at it. My name in print. Photos of something I created. Yoim told me to let myself feel proud, without qualifying it with worry. I nodded, and actually tried, sitting with the accomplishment instead of immediately looking for ways it might fall apart. My next session with Melina was a few days before Christmas. We'd been meeting every other week since the Curtis situation. She opened by asking if I thought I was ready to reduce to monthly check-ins. The question caught me off guard. I thought about the past few months. The family crisis hadn't destroyed the stability I'd built. I'd handled it, without falling apart. Yes, I told her. I think I'm ready. She smiled. She already knew. We talked about what monthly check-ins would look like, what warning signs to watch for. Walking out of her office, I felt a different kind of pride. Quieter, deeper, about emotional work nobody saw. But that mattered just as much. Celian and I were washing dishes one night when he brought up the future, different from our usual vague planning. Have you thought about getting engaged? He asked. My immediate reaction was to check for panic about cursing our relationship. But it didn't come. I dried a plate. Honestly, I said I have, and I don't feel scared anymore. I've learned my presence in people's lives isn't a burden. It's a gift. He stopped washing, looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite name. We should talk seriously about it, he said. We spent the next hour on the couch, mapping out what we wanted our lives to look like. It was easy, exciting, not heavy with dread about inevitable failure. I wrote the letter to my parents on a Saturday morning while Celian was at the gym. I'd written versions before, never sent them. Always talked myself out of it. This time it was brief, clear. I explained I was open to contact if they could respect me as an adult with my own life, but I wouldn't accept blame or manipulation anymore. I outlined specific boundaries, what kind of relationship I was willing to have, what behaviors I wouldn't tolerate. I read it 3 times, checking for anything that sounded like I was asking for their approval. Then I addressed an envelope, walked to the mailbox, dropped it through the slot with a soft thud. I stood there for a moment, lighter and heavier at the same time. 3 weeks passed. No response. I checked the mail every day, even though I told myself I wouldn't. Celian asked if I was okay. I realized I actually was. Their silence was an answer in itself. Some people aren't capable of the relationship I deserve, and that's about them, not me. I stopped checking the mail obsessively, focused on the life I was building instead of the one I'd never have with them. Curtis called in mid-January. I answered on the 3rd ring. He sounded different, more energetic. He'd gotten a job offer, tech support, moving into his own apartment next month. His voice shook a little, nervous but excited. I genuinely encouraged him. I'm happy you're building your independence, I told him. And I meant it. We talked for 20 minutes. His apartment search, his new job, the most normal sibling conversation we'd ever had. Before we hung up, he thanked me again for meeting him back in November. It helped me see things more clearly, he said. You did the hard work yourself, I told him. I just listened. After the call, I sat in my home office, looking at the framed magazine article. My cat jumped into my lap, purring. I pet her, thinking about how far I'd come. I realized somewhere along the way, I stopped thinking of myself as the family scapegoat. I started seeing myself as someone who survived a difficult childhood and built something beautiful anyway. The shift in identity felt huge, like stepping into a version of myself I always wanted to be but didn't think I deserved. I wasn't the cursed daughter, the bad luck charm, the burden they tried to make me believe I was. I was just someone who refused to accept their story about who I had to be, and wrote a better one instead. Tuesday night, I was on the couch, feet tucked under me. Celian was rinsing dinner plates. He turned around, wiped his hands, then walked over and sat beside me. He took my hand. His palm is warm against mine. I don't want to wait for some perfect moment, he said, because our regular life together is already perfect. He asked if I'd marry him. His voice was steady, but his hand trembled slightly. I said yes before he even finished. Tears slid down my cheeks. He pulled a simple silver ring from his pocket, slid it onto my finger. We sat there, crying and laughing. This moment wasn't cursed or doomed or temporary. It was just real. Good. Mine. We spent the next hour calling people. Hi answered on the first ring. Screamed so loud I had to hold the phone away. She was already talking about engagement party colors before I could say we hadn't planned anything. Alyssa congratulated us. Said she knew it was coming. Never seen two people fit, so naturally. Each call felt easy, happy. No weight of family drama. No waiting for someone to tell me it wouldn't last. I texted Curtis. Calling felt too formal for where we were. He responded within minutes. Happy for me. Asked if he could meet Celian sometime. Yes. I typed back. Genuinely. Having one family member truly trying to show up differently felt like more than I ever expected. Over the next few weeks, wedding planning was actually enjoyable, not a source of stress. Celian and I looked at venues with Hi, laughed at her elaborate ideas. We picked a small garden space, intimate, warm. I made a guest list of people who wanted to celebrate with us, not people I was obligated to include. Curtis texted occasionally, offering to help with setup. I added him to the list without hesitation. The whole process felt light, joyful. I was surrounded by people who chose me, and I chose them back. I realized one night, addressing invitations, that this was the family I needed all along. Not the one I was born into, the one that treated me like a burden, but the one I built myself. From friends and partners, and the one brother who decided to do better. That wasn't bad luck finally breaking. That was just the best thing I ever did for myself.